He once ordered a man killed before finishing his morning coffee. But the most unforgivable order he gave to the mother of his own child. Damen Moretti ran Chicago's most feared criminal empire for 23 years. He was untouchable, ruthless. He was built from stone and silence, and the particular coldness of a man who had learned very young that feeling things was a liability he couldn't afford. Then his wife found out about the affair. He let her go without a fight, because he had never really held on to begin with. And when she came to him with the news that she was carrying his child, he looked her in the eye across a kitchen table and told her to end it. She said she would. She lied. And for 8 months, Damen Moretti lived with the quiet certainty that he had erased the only innocent thing he had ever been connected to. That is, until a Tuesday afternoon in a city 200 miles from Chicago, when he turned a corner and saw his ex-wife crossing a sunlit square. Her hand was resting on the unmistakable curve of a pregnancy she was supposed to have ended. The child was alive. She had protected their daughter from him. And in that single moment, the most feared man in Chicago understood something that 23 years of power had never taught him, that the most dangerous thing he had ever done wasn't ordering violence. It was walking away from love like it was something he could afford to waste. This is the story of what it cost to become someone worth forgiving. The rain had been threatening Chicago all evening, hanging over the skyline like a bruise that refused to break. Damen Moretti stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office on the 42nd floor. A glass of scotch balanced in one hand, the city's lights blurring beneath him like a fever dream. He hadn't touched the drink. He rarely did anymore. The alcohol was just something to hold. It was a prop in the performance of a man who had everything under control. He didn't. He was 41 years old, 6'2" of cold muscle and a colder reputation. He was the kind of man whose name made other men's voices drop half a register when they said it. Damen Moretti had inherited an empire at 26 when his father, Enzo Moretti, took 3 bullets outside a restaurant on South Michigan Avenue and didn't get up. Damen had stood over the body in the rain. 17-year-old witnesses be damned. He felt something click shut inside his chest, some last door between who he might have been and who he was always going to become. He had been closing doors ever since. Behind him, Marco Vitelli sat in the leather chair by the fireplace, pretending to read something on his phone. Marco had been Damien's right hand for 11 years. He knew better than to speak when Damien was standing at that window. Nobody spoke when Damien was standing at that window. "She is downstairs," Marco said anyway. Damen didn't turn. "I know. You want me to send her up? Give me a minute." Marco set his phone face down on his knee and waited. That was the other thing about him. He knew how to wait. Elena had been waiting too, but not in the way a woman waits when she is nervous. She sat in the marble lobby 42 floors below. Her coat was folded neatly across her lap, her spine straight, her hands completely still. The security guard at the desk kept glancing at her. She didn't look like the kind of woman who came to see Damen Moretti. Most women who came to this building arrived with ambition written across their faces. They were hungry, deliberate, performing. Elena just looked like someone who had made up her mind about something and was conserving her energy for whatever came next. She was 34. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. She had a face that wasn't loud about its beauty, but didn't apologize for it either. She had been married to Damien for 3 years, and in that time, she had learned to read silences the way other people read words. She knew the particular texture of his quiet when he was angry versus when he was simply absent, which was most of the time. Tonight, she wasn't here to read his silence. She was here to end it. The elevator opened, and Damen stepped out alone. He told Marco to stay upstairs. Whatever happened in the next hour, he didn't want to witness. He crossed the lobby without hurrying, hands in the pockets of his dark trousers. His face gave nothing away. Elena stood when she saw him. They hadn't been in the same room in 11 days. "You could have called," he said. "I could have," she agreed. "I wanted to see your face." He gestured toward a small sitting area off the main lobby. It had 2 chairs and a low table. It was the kind of corporate neutral space designed to feel private without actually being private. She followed him without comment. They sat across from each other, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. She saw the faint shadow beneath his eyes that told her he hadn't been sleeping either. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a folded envelope on the table between them. He looked at it without touching it. What is that? Photographs, receipts, a hotel key card registered under a name you used twice before, once in Milan, once in New York. She paused. She has been in your life for 8 months, Damien. I just needed 3 weeks to confirm what I already knew. The silence that followed wasn't the angry kind. It was worse. It was the silence of a man who had been caught, not because he was careless, but because some part of him had stopped caring whether he was. Elena, don't. Her voice was quiet, precise. It was the kind of quiet that costs something to maintain. I am not here to fight with you. I am not here to cry, and I am not going to. I am here because I needed you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth for once. That is all. He looked at her, then really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. He saw the stillness of her face, the exhaustion behind it that she was working hard not to show. He felt something move in his chest. Not guilt exactly, more like the recognition of a damage already done, a wall already fallen, and the pointless instinct to wish it hadn't been. It is not. He stopped, started again. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. She almost smiled. The almost was the cruelest part. That is the thing, Damien. You weren't trying to do anything. That has been the problem all along. He said nothing. Did you love her? He thought about lying. He was good at it. He had been lying with his silence for 3 years, which was a different kind of lie and somehow worse. But Elena was watching him with those steady, dark eyes, and something about the steadiness of them made the lie feel pointless. No, he said. She absorbed that, nodded once slowly, like a doctor receiving a result she had already suspected. Did you ever love me? The question landed between them like something dropped from a great height. He watched it hit. The honest answer was complicated in a way that felt like cowardice, and he knew it. Enzo Moretti had arranged the marriage when Damien was 38. Elena's family had connections Enzo wanted secured. It was old money from the Vale side that traced back to shipping routes and political favors in the 40s. Love had never been part of the conversation. Damen had met Elena 4 times before the wedding. She had been gracious and calm, and entirely too good for everything he represented, and he had known it even then. He had married her anyway because his father asked, and because disappointing Enzo Moretti had consequences. He had spent his life learning not to incur. I respected you, he said finally. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and picked up the envelope and put it back in her pocket. That is what I needed to hear, she said, her voice perfectly even. She stood up. You deserve better than what I gave you, he said. It wasn't an apology. It was just the truth, stated plainly, which was the only currency he had left to offer. I know that. She buttoned her coat. I would like the divorce to be handled quietly. No attorneys sniping at each other in the press. I will sign whatever is reasonable. I don't want money, Damen. I want out. He stood. I will have the papers drawn by the end of the week. She nodded, moved toward the elevator, then paused, not turning around. For whatever it is worth, I did love you. I loved you in every way I knew how for every day of 3 years. I just want you to know that. The elevator came. She stepped in, and the doors closed. Damen stood in the lobby alone for a long time. His scotch was still untouched 42 floors above him, the city bleeding its cold light through the glass, and he said nothing at all. The divorce papers were signed on a Thursday morning in late October. There was no ceremony to it. Just 2 attorneys and a notary in a conference room that smelled of old coffee. And then it was done. Elena signed first, her handwriting neat and unhurried. Damien signed second, his pen barely pausing. They didn't look at each other. Outside the building, Elena walked 2 blocks south and sat on a bench facing the lake. The wind was punishing. It was that particular Chicago knife wind that cuts right through you and doesn't apologize. She sat in it anyway. She needed to feel something concrete. The cold was real. The wind was real. That was enough for now. She told herself she was fine. She had been telling herself that for weeks. The nausea hit her the following morning. She had been ignoring the signs. The fatigue she had attributed to stress, the way certain smells had started to bother her, the 2 missed weeks she had written off as the body's response to emotional trauma. She was 34, under extraordinary pressure, and her marriage had been quietly dying for the better part of a year. She had reasons to explain everything. She sat on the bathroom floor at 6 in the morning with a test from the drugstore 2 blocks away. She stared at the result until the tiles went cold beneath her. The number that formed in her mind, 10 weeks, hit her like a physical impact. 10 weeks meant it had happened before she had known about the affair. Before the confrontation, before the lobby and the cold and the paperwork and the elevator closing. 10 weeks meant this wasn't something that happened after. This was something that had been quietly growing in the middle of everything that fell apart. She pressed her back against the cabinet beneath the sink and breathed. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She didn't cry. She just sat there in the bathroom light and thought clearly, with the precision of someone solving a problem that cannot be solved by emotion alone. She thought about what she had, what she didn't have, and what she was going to do next. She called Damien at 7:30. He answered on the second ring, which told her he was already awake. This told her he wasn't sleeping, which she filed away and didn't dwell on. "I need to see you," she said. He met her at the house. Their former house, technically his house. It was the 6-bedroom stone estate in Lincoln Park that she had spent 3 years filling with small warmths he had never acknowledged. She was already inside when he arrived, sitting at the kitchen table. She had made coffee. The domesticity of it seemed to throw him slightly. He sat across from her and wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking. She told him straight out. No preamble. Elena had learned that much from 3 years with a man who found softening things more insulting than the things themselves. Damen put the mug down. For a moment, just a single strange moment, she saw something cross his face. It might in another life, with another version of him, have been wonder. It was there and gone so fast she almost doubted she had seen it. "How long?" he said. 10 weeks. He was quiet. "Then we are divorced." "Yes, Elena." He said her name the way he said most things, flatly. The emotion pressed so far down it had become something else, something solid and dense and unreachable. "I have moved on. I told you that. I know what you told me. Then you know what I need you to do. Don't." She said the word softly, but it stopped him. "Don't say it. Don't say that to me." He looked at her across the table, across the coffee, in the morning light, and the wreckage of 3 years. And she watched him choose. She could see him choosing. She had never been able to read him well. He was built not to be read. But this she could see, because the choice he was making was the worst one available, and he was reaching for it with both hands. "I can arrange." "I heard you," she said, and stood up and took her coat from the back of the chair. "I heard you, Damien. Elena, I will let you know when the baby is born." She said it so simply, so without effect, that it took him a moment to process what he had heard. That is not goodbye. She walked out of her own kitchen, the kitchen where she had cooked Sunday dinners he had eaten in silence, where she had stuck handwritten notes to the refrigerator that she had sometimes found weeks later, unread on the counter. And she did not look back, not once, not at the door, not at the end of the driveway, not on the street. She had learned something about herself in 3 years. She could survive almost anything. She just needed to remember that she had already been surviving. She was gone from Chicago within 4 days. Nobody saw it coming because nobody was watching for it. Elena was not the kind of woman who announced her exits. She settled accounts quietly, packed what mattered, which wasn't much. And she called the one person she trusted completely, her grandmother, Connie Vale. Connie lived in a small town in the Arizona desert called Miraloma and had been telling Elena for 3 years to come visit. Connie was 73, sharp as a scalpel, and deeply unimpressed by men who confused power with worth. When Elena called her from a highway rest stopped somewhere in Missouri, driving a car loaded with 3 suitcases and a box of books, she told her everything. The divorce, the affair, the baby. Connie listened without interrupting. Then she said, "How far out are you?" "Maybe 2 days." "I will have the back room cleared by tonight." That was all. No dramatics, no recrimination, no flood of comfort that would have made Elena crack. Just the practical love of someone who understood that the best thing you can give a woman who has already decided to survive is a clear path to do it. Elena drove through the night. She arrived in Miraloma on a Sunday just before dawn, when the desert was still cool and the sky had gone the color of dark plum on the horizon. Connie was waiting on the porch with coffee and a blanket. She said nothing when Elena got out of the car. She just opened her arms, and Elena walked into them and stood there. She didn't cry then either. She would cry later alone in the back room in the dark, quietly enough that Connie wouldn't hear. But for now, she just stood there in the desert before sunrise and breathed the clean, dry air that smelled of sage and dust, and nothing that reminded her of him. Back in Chicago, Damien was told Elena had suffered a miscarriage. She hadn't told him that. She told no one that. But the story circulated anyway through acquaintances, through the quiet social web of women who had known them both. And by the time it reached Damien, it had the texture of established fact. He accepted it without questioning it. Why would he question it? He told her what he wanted her to do. He had assumed she had done it. He assumed that for almost a full year. The woman's name was Cara Rinaldi. She was 30 and sharp, and electric in the way that some people are electric. She had the kind of brightness that fills a room and makes you forget briefly to look for the shadows behind it. Damien had met her 8 months before the divorce, at a fundraising event for a hospital wing his family had endowed. She had been fearless with him in a way most people weren't. She said exactly what she thought, laughed at him when he was being ridiculous. And for a few months, not more, she had made him feel like a person instead of a function. It hadn't survived contact with reality. By December, 2 months after the divorce, the relationship had developed the particular staleness of something built on adrenaline and sustained on nothing else. They argued not dramatically but mechanically in loops. They revisited the same complaints with the patient futility of people who both know it is over but haven't yet found the precise moment to say so. Cara said it first. She said it on a Tuesday in his kitchen. It was the kitchen in the new apartment he had moved to after giving Elena the house without being asked. Some part of him had known Elena should keep it, even if he hadn't known why. And she said it without anger, which was somehow the most damning version. You are not here, Damien. You have never been here. I don't know where you are, but it is not with me. He thought about arguing. He thought about it for several seconds, turning the argument over, looking for an angle, and then he realized he didn't have one. I know, he said. She left that night. He didn't stop her. The apartment was very quiet after she left. He sat in it and tried to identify what he felt, which was something he rarely bothered to do. What he identified was not grief, not relief, not even loneliness exactly. What he felt was something more like the awareness of a wound that had been there for a long time, and that he had been moving carefully around without looking at directly. He thought about Elena, not for the first time, not even for the 10th. He thought about the kitchen, and the coffee, and the clarity in her voice when she had told him she was carrying his child. He thought about the way she had put her coat on and left without looking back. He thought about the note she had left on his refrigerator the morning of their first anniversary. He had found it weeks later stuck behind a takeout menu. Small, neat handwriting that said simply, "Happy anniversary. I hope today is a good one for you." He hadn't acknowledged it. He hadn't even acknowledged finding it. The note was still in his desk drawer. He didn't know why he had kept it. He didn't let himself think about the baby. He couldn't. He had made a choice, or he had allowed a choice, which was close enough to the same thing. He told himself it was the right decision. He told himself he was not the kind of man who should be a father, which was true. It was the most honest thing about himself he had ever acknowledged. He told himself that, and then he slept, and then he dreamed. The dream was not elaborate. That was what made it stay. He dreamed of a clinic, white walls, fluorescent light, the hush of a place designed to absorb human weight without showing it. He was watching through glass. It was the way you watch things in dreams without questioning why you are watching from outside. Elena was inside. She was sitting alone in a waiting room chair, coat still on, bag in her lap. Her face was turned slightly away. Then she walked out of a door at the back of the room, and her arms were empty. And her eyes, the eyes he knew so well, the calm, dark eyes that never flinched from anything, were not sad. They were just gone. Whatever had been behind them had been quietly closed off, door by door. It was the way he had spent his whole life closing things off. And now she looked like him. She looked exactly like him. And it was the most horrible thing he had ever seen. He woke at 3 in the morning with his heart slamming against his ribs. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. Then he got dressed and drove. The clinic was on the north side. He had found the name through his own network. It was not difficult. He had people who could find anything. And he arrived there at 7:45 in the morning, before the city had fully remembered itself. He sat in his car across the street and watched the door. He didn't know what he was doing there. He didn't have a plan. Moretti, who had never made a single significant move in his professional life without a plan, sat across the street from a medical clinic on a gray November morning with absolutely nothing prepared. At 9:15, he went inside. The woman at the front desk was professional and entirely unintimidated by him, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. He gave Elena's name. He asked a question he didn't quite know how to phrase. She looked at him calmly and said she couldn't discuss patient records. He stood there. He thought about the forms of pressure he could apply, the levers he knew how to pull, and then found for the first time in his memory that he didn't want to use any of them. Not here, not for this. He left. He called Elena from the parking lot. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was even, careful. It was the voice she used when she was managing something. I need to know, he said. A pause. Know what? Elena. Another pause. Longer. It is done, Damien. Her voice didn't break. It was quiet and flat and final. It is done. It is over. Please don't call me again. She ended the call. He sat in the parking lot until a security guard knocked on his window and asked if he needed assistance. He drove home. He sat at his desk and opened the drawer and took out the anniversary note. He held it for a while. The small paper square in his large hands, her small, neat writing. Happy anniversary. I hope today is a good one for you. She had written that to a man who hadn't deserved it, who hadn't even read it for weeks, who had, in the end, told her to get rid of their child because it didn't fit into the life he had decided he wanted. He put the note back in the drawer. And Damen Moretti, who had not cried since the night his father died on South Michigan Avenue in the rain 23 years ago, sat at his desk with his hands flat on the surface and breathed carefully. He did not let himself fall apart. Falling apart was a luxury he hadn't earned and wasn't sure he deserved. 8 months passed. He let go of 3 operations, stepped back from 2 more. The men around him noticed, but said nothing. You didn't say certain things to Damen Moretti. You seemed different lately, was one of them. He was different. Something had gone quiet in him that had always been running. Some engine of ambition and control that had burned for so long he had mistaken it for who he was. He started going to bed at a reasonable hour. He stopped drinking the scotch he had always held but never touched. He ate meals that weren't at his desk. He had them at the actual table like a person, even when the table was very large and very empty. He was becoming something he didn't have a name for yet. And then on a Tuesday afternoon in June, in a city 250 miles south of Chicago, he had gone there to close out a legitimate real estate arrangement. One of the new ones, the clean ones, the ones he could sign with both names, and no shame. Damen Moretti turned a corner onto a sunlit public square and stopped walking and stopped thinking. Because across the square, moving slowly in the afternoon light, with a hand resting on the curve of her stomach, was Elena. She hadn't seen him. She was looking at something in a shop window. A small thing, a child's thing, a yellow something in a display of soft goods, and her profile was turned toward him in the light, and she was very obviously, undeniably, beautifully pregnant. The world did not slow down. It didn't need to. Everything was already perfectly, catastrophically still. She never did it. The thought arrived not as a sentence, but as a physical sensation. A current through his chest, through his hands, down his legs, all the way to the concrete beneath his feet. She had looked him in the eye. She had said, "It is done." She had said, "It is over." And she had lied to him. Elena Vale, who never lied, had lied to him. And in the lie was everything. The whole indictment of him. The whole story of what he had been, and what she had had to protect her child from. The whole architecture of his failure as a human being laid out in one image. A woman standing in the afternoon sun alone, protecting a life he had tried to end. He took one step forward. She turned and her eyes found him across 30 feet of open square, and the color left her face. 30 feet of open air between them, and it might as well have been the surface of the moon. Elena didn't run. That was the first thing he registered. She didn't bolt, didn't spin and walk fast in the other direction. She didn't do any of the things fear would have told her to do. She just stood there, her hands still resting on the curve of her stomach. She looked at him with the kind of stillness that isn't calm at all, but is what is left after calm has been used up entirely. Damen crossed the square. He didn't know what he was going to say. Every word he had ever used as a weapon, every sentence he had ever constructed to control a room, had evacuated completely. He arrived in front of her with nothing. No plan, no speech, no version of himself that knew how to handle this. He stood there like a man who had been asked a question in a language he had never learned. She spoke first. "Don't," she said. One word. Her voice was low and flat, and it contained everything. "Elena, I mean it, Damien. Whatever you are about to say, don't." He looked at her. At the fullness of her face, the slight puffiness around her eyes that came from bad sleep or crying or both. The way she was standing with her weight shifted slightly back, accommodating the life she was carrying. She was maybe 7 months along, maybe more. He didn't know. He knew nothing. He had spent 8 months knowing nothing and telling himself that was acceptable. "You told me," he stopped. "I know what I told you. You said it was done. It is done." Her eyes didn't move from his face. "We are done. You and I are completely done. And whatever you think this is, whatever you think you are entitled to standing here, you need to think again." He heard himself say, "That is my child." Elena's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the particular control of someone who has spent months preparing for exactly this conversation. She had decided exactly how much of herself she was willing to spend on it. "Your child," she said quietly, "is the child you told me to get rid of." The words hit the way she meant them to hit. He didn't flinch from them. "I know what I said." "Then you know where we are." A group of tourists moved past them on the square, oblivious and cheerful. A child ran between them with a balloon. The ordinary world continued its business. Damen watched Elena's hand on her stomach. The instinctive, automatic nature of it. The way she didn't even know she was doing it. The way her body had already reorganized itself entirely around the task of protecting this child. He felt something inside him that was not a feeling he had vocabulary for. He had spent 41 years constructing a man who didn't need vocabulary for things like this. He was paying for that now in real time. "I was wrong," he said. Elena looked at him. "I was wrong about everything." He said it without decoration, without the softening qualifiers that would have made it easier for him to say, and less true when it landed. "What I asked you to do, what I told you to do, there is no version of that that wasn't wrong. I knew it when I said it, and I said it anyway." She didn't speak. "And I spent 8 months telling myself you had done it, because I needed to believe I hadn't destroyed something I can't. I couldn't." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I couldn't fix." Elena watched him struggle with the sentence. She watched him stand there in the afternoon light, unable to finish it. Her expression didn't soften, but something in it shifted. A micro-adjustment, barely visible. The look of a woman who is reassessing a threat and finding it changed from what she expected, without yet deciding what that means. "What do you want, Damien?" she said finally. He didn't have a clean answer. He had the truth, which was messy and incomplete and didn't come with guarantees. "I want to be in my daughter's life," he said. Somewhere in the past 90 seconds, he had decided it was a daughter. Or maybe he had known it before that, in the dream, in the clinic parking lot, in the months of empty rooms that followed. "And I want to try to be someone worth letting near her." The silence stretched. A pigeon landed near Elena's feet, regarded them both with professional indifference, and left. "You think one conversation does that?" she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "You think showing up?" "No." He said it again quietly, cutting off the argument at the root. "I don't think anything I say does anything. I know that you would be insane to trust anything I say. I know that, too." She studied him. There was a coldness to her assessment that he had never seen in her before. She had been warm in their marriage, relentlessly warm in the face of his distance. The absence of that warmth now was its own kind of verdict. "Go home, Damien," she said. She walked away from him. "Same as the lobby, same as the kitchen. No looking back. He stood in the square and watched her go. And this time, instead of the particular numbness that had protected him from every difficult thing for 23 years, he felt the full unmediated weight of it. All of it landing at once, the way it had been waiting to land for a long time. He let it. He drove back to Chicago the next morning. He went to his office and sat at his desk and called Marco. Marco came in and sat down across from him the way he always did. Loose, watchful, not performing anything, and waited. "I need to make some changes," Damen said. Marco looked at him. "What kind?" "Significant ones." Marco picked up his phone and then put it back down. "This about the woman in the square?" Damien looked at him. "You were there. I am always there. You know that." It was true. Damen had never particularly thought about it. Marco's omnipresence was a feature of his life so consistent it had become invisible like gravity. Now he thought about it. He thought about all the things Marco had witnessed in 11 years. All the versions of Damen Moretti he had sat across from and said nothing about. "She is pregnant," Damen said. "I saw. It is mine." Marco was quiet for a moment. "I figured. I told her to end it." Another pause. "I didn't know that part." "She didn't. She hid it." He looked at the desk. The anniversary note was still in the drawer. He hadn't moved it in 8 months. 8 months, Marco. "She has been alone out there carrying my kid. And I didn't know because I didn't ask, because I didn't want to know." Marco said nothing. He was good at that. "I need to step back from the Duca operation and the port arrangement." "Damien," Marco's voice was careful. "Those aren't small things to walk away from. I know what they are. The people involved. I will handle the people involved." He said it flatly. Not as a threat, but as a statement of mechanics. He had built those arrangements. He knew which joints they turned on. He could take them apart with the same precision. "I am not asking for your advice on this, Marco. I am telling you because you need to be prepared." Marco sat with this for a moment. Then he said, Okay. You are the boss. You always have been." A pause. "I will start making calls." Damen nodded and looked at his window. The city was gray and busy beneath him, indifferent to whatever he decided, as it had always been. He had spent 23 years believing the city's indifference was something to emulate. He was only now beginning to understand what it had cost him. He drove to Arizona 3 weeks later. He hadn't called ahead. He knew that Elena would have told him not to come, and he respected that enough to spare them both the argument. But he needed to come anyway, not to force himself on her, not to demand anything, but because distance was the one luxury he wasn't willing to keep accepting. You could not fix something from 250 miles away. He wasn't sure yet if it could be fixed at all. But he had lived his whole life refusing to stand in a room with difficult things, and he was done with that. Miraloma was exactly what the name suggested. Small, sunbeaten, settled. It was the kind of place that had found its pace about 40 years ago, and seen no compelling reason to change it. The main street had a hardware store, a diner, a library barely bigger than a living room, and several blocks of quiet residential streets. The houses had deep porches, and the yards had gravel instead of grass. He found the address without difficulty. He parked on the street in front of a small adobe house with a porch that held 2 rocking chairs. There was a collection of potted cacti in various stages of attitude, and one very alert older woman who was watching him from the moment he opened his car door. He stopped at the front gate. "You must be Connie," he said. The woman looked him over. She was small and compact, with silver hair and eyes that were almost the same dark shade as Elena's. She had the relaxed authority of someone who had earned the right to judge people and had stopped worrying about whether they knew it. "I know who you are," she said. "You look worse in person than I expected." He almost said thank you by reflex, caught himself, and said nothing instead. "She doesn't want to see you." "I know. But you came anyway." "Yes." Connie looked at him for a long time, rocking gently, hands in her lap. "You know what I want to do with you? I have some ideas. I want to tell you to get back in your fancy car and drive back to Chicago. I want to let my granddaughter have her baby and her life without you anywhere near it." She said it without raising her voice, without heat, just as the statement of a logical position. "That is what I want to do." He waited. "But she is going to need help." Connie said, slower now, reluctant. "She is stubborn and she will say she doesn't. But she is 8 months along. She doesn't know anyone in this town well enough. And I am 73 with a knee that has been lying to me for 6 years. She stopped rocking. So, I am going to tell you that you can come back tomorrow morning and you can sit on this porch. And if Elena decides she wants to talk to you, that is her business. If she doesn't, you sit on this porch anyway and you do not push. Understood. And if you do push, she tilted her head slightly. I have a very large dog and absolutely no hesitation. He nodded. Tomorrow morning. He drove to the nearest motel, which was 15 minutes outside of town. It had the particular personality of a place that had never expected much and was therefore never disappointed. He sat on the edge of the bed in room 7 and called Marco to check in. Then he didn't call anyone else because there wasn't anyone else to call. He was only now understanding that this was a fact about his life that said something he didn't like hearing. He ate at the diner on the main street that evening. The woman who served him was cheerful and didn't know who he was, which was unexpectedly pleasant. He ordered something without looking at the menu and ate it without tasting it. He left a tip that was too large and didn't explain why. Back in room 7, he stared at the ceiling for a long time and thought about what he was doing. He had dismantled pieces of an empire that had taken 23 years and 2 generations to build. He had driven to a small desert town in Arizona to sit on a porch at the invitation of a 73-year-old woman with a bad knee and a large dog. He had no plan, no leverage, no version of himself that knew how to do what he was attempting to do. All he had was the knowledge that everything he had done before this had been wrong in ways he had chosen not to examine, and that the moment in the square when he had seen Elena's hand on her stomach had broken something open in him that was not going to close again, regardless of what she decided. He turned the light off at 10 o'clock. He was back at the house at 7:15 the next morning, and the next and the one after that. Always at the same time, always with coffee from the diner. One for himself and one left on the top porch step for whoever wanted it. For the first 4 days, it was nobody but Connie, who accepted it without comment and returned the cup clean each time. He took this as neither encouragement nor rejection, but simply as the shape of things. On the 5th day, the front door opened and Elena came out. She lowered herself into the second rocking chair with the careful deliberateness of a woman in her final weeks of pregnancy. She didn't look at him and she didn't say anything, and Damien sat in the other chair and also didn't say anything. They watched the desert morning together in silence for 40 minutes, until Connie called from inside that breakfast was ready. Elena stood and paused. She said without turning, "If you push any of it, you are done here." "I understand," he said. She went inside. He sat on the porch alone and drank the rest of his coffee. He felt something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Not happiness, not relief. Something smaller and more real than either. It was the feeling of a man who has, for the first time in his life, shown up somewhere without an agenda and been allowed to remain. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to forgiveness. But it was a porch in the desert, and a rocking chair, and a woman who hadn't told him to leave. For today, it was enough. And somewhere inside the house, growing daily toward a world she didn't yet know was waiting for her, his daughter continued becoming. He came back every morning. That was the thing nobody had prepared Elena for. Not Connie. Not the small logical voice in her own head that had spent 8 months building walls and shoring up foundations, and preparing for every conceivable version of her future. None of that preparation had included the specific grinding weight of Damen Moretti showing up at 7:15 every single morning with coffee from the diner on Main Street, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch and not demanding anything. She had expected demands. Demands she knew how to handle. She had a whole architecture built for demands. The cold refusals, the measured silences, the precise language that cut without raising her voice. She had rehearsed versions of this confrontation in the dark at 3 in the morning when the baby pressed against her ribs, and sleep was a distant rumor. She knew what to do with the man who pushed. She didn't know what to do with a man who just sat there. By the end of the first week, Connie had stopped pretending she wasn't watching. She sat in the kitchen with her coffee and observed through the screen door. With the detached interest of someone watching a nature documentary about a species she found questionable. On the sixth morning, she said to Elena without preamble, "He fixed the gate." Elena looked up from her breakfast. "What?" "The latch on the side gate. It has been broken since March. He fixed it sometime yesterday afternoon." Connie sipped her coffee. "I didn't ask him to." Elena said nothing. "Also, the third porch step. The one that creaks. Connie, I am just reporting facts. You can do whatever you like with them." Elena pushed her eggs around her plate. Outside, the desert morning was doing what it always did, burning slowly from the horizon in, the light going from purple to pink to a hard, honest gold. She had come to love the mornings here. They were nothing like Chicago mornings, which arrived gray and complicated and smelling of other people's ambition. Desert mornings were blunt. They said, "Here is the day. It will be hot. Make your choices." "He is not going to stop coming," she said. "It wasn't a question. Doesn't appear so. He is trying to make me trust him." Connie set her mug down. "Is it working?" Elena pushed back from the table. "No," she said, and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed. She pressed both palms against the round, hard reality of her stomach and breathed until the tightness in her chest loosened. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate roll, a heel or a knee shifting beneath her hands, and she closed her eyes. "I know," she said quietly to no one, to both of them. "I know." On the ninth morning, she came out with her own coffee and sat in the second chair. She said, "Why did you step back from the Duca operation?" Damen's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He lowered it. "Marco told you." "Marco didn't tell me anything. I have my own sources." She looked at him sideways. "Did you think I stopped paying attention just because I left?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then the Duca operation was the one my father built before anything else. Before the port arrangement, before the West Side Territory. That was the foundation. I stepped back from it because it was the thing I inherited, not the thing I chose. And I am trying to figure out the difference between those two categories." She looked at him for a long time. She looked for the angle in it, the strategy, the Damen Moretti version of a speech designed to produce a specific result. She had learned to look for that. The chess move disguised as honesty. She didn't find it, which bothered her more than finding it would have. "That doesn't change anything," she said. "I know. You don't get credit for dismantling things you should never have built. I know that, too." She stood up. The getting up was getting harder. It required a hand on the armrest and a moment of ungraceful negotiation. She went inside without looking back. At the door, she stopped. "The front steps need repainting," she said to the doorframe. "The wood is showing through on the second and fourth." She went inside. Behind her, she heard him set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. He had paint on his forearms by noon. Connie watched him work from the kitchen window, standing at the sink, rinsing dishes, tracking him the way she tracked everything. Sideways, steady, without committing to a conclusion. He was working methodically, which she had expected. What she hadn't expected was the quality of attention he brought to it. He wasn't performing. He wasn't going through motions designed to be observed. He sanded each step before he painted it, which nobody had asked him to do, which would have been invisible if she hadn't been watching. She dried her hands and went to the back porch, where Elena was sitting in the shade with a book she hadn't been reading for the past 20 minutes. "You know what that man reminds me of?" Connie said. "Don't?" "Your grandfather a little." Elena lowered the book and gave her a look that could have cracked an apple. "Do not finish that sentence." "I am just saying, Nona." Connie heard the childhood name and heard what it meant. Not anger, but the exhaustion beneath the anger. The bone deep tired of a woman who has been holding herself together with precision. She doesn't have the reserves right now for a conversation that might cost her some of that precision. "Please." Connie sat down beside her. They were quiet for a moment, both of them looking at the desert beyond the yard. The flat scrub in the mountains that turned purple in the afternoon light. "He is going to be here when she is born," Connie said. Not a suggestion, just the recognition of a trajectory already in motion. "He can be here," Elena said carefully, without being forgiven. "I know those are not the same thing." "I know that too, sweetheart." Elena pressed her lips together. From the front of the house came the small, deliberate sounds of a man sanding a porch step. "He does one wrong thing," she said. "One. I heard you. I mean it, Elena." Connie reached over and put her hand over Elena's where it rested on the swell of her stomach. I heard you. The wrong thing came from a direction neither of them expected. His name was Vincent Caruso, and he arrived in Miraloma on a Thursday afternoon in a black SUV with 2 men in the back seat. He had the practiced ease of someone who had never once in his adult life been told to wait. Caruso was 56, silver-haired, with the build of a man who had been large and powerful once. He had let it go to mass rather than maintaining it as muscle. He ran the east side of an arrangement that intersected with several of Damien's former operations, in ways that had always been carefully managed and never directly acknowledged. He was not a man Damien had enemies with. He was also not a man Damien had friends with. The distinction mattered in their world the way altitude matters to a pilot. Invisibly, until suddenly it doesn't. Damien was in the backyard, splitting wood. Connie had pointed at a pile of logs behind the shed with the same economy of gesture she used for all her communications with him. He had understood it as an assignment and begun when Marco called. You need to know something, Marco said. Tell me. Caruso made contact. He wants a meeting. Damen set the axe down against the woodpile. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could see the light where Elena was moving around inside. The shape of her passing the glass. What kind of meeting? The kind that isn't optional. Marco paused. He knows about the girl, Damien. He knows where she is. The air changed. Something in it went flat and hard and very cold, despite the 100-degree Arizona afternoon pressing down on everything. Damen turned away from the window. How? I don't know yet. I am working on it. How long has he known? Unknown. He didn't bring it up as a threat exactly. More like a demonstration. He mentioned Miraloma. He mentioned the grandmother's house. He said it the way you say something when you want a man to understand the full shape of a conversation. Damien picked up the axe and set it against the shed wall. He walked to the far end of the yard, where the desert started, and stood there with his back to the house. His jaw was tight. His hands were loose, which was the thing people who knew him had learned to watch for. Damen Moretti's hands went loose when he was at his most dangerous, the tension having moved somewhere more central. What does he want? The port arrangement. He wants back in. You pulling out left a gap, and he wants it filled with his people. That is not happening. I know. He knows you will say that. I think the point wasn't the ask. The point was to let you know that he has been paying attention to your life in ways you hadn't accounted for. Damen stood at the edge of the desert and looked at the mountains and said nothing for a moment. Handle the source, he said finally. Whoever talked, I want to know. And Marco. Yeah. Nobody comes near this town. Nobody. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, this place stays clean. Understood. A pause. You want me out there? Not yet. I will tell you when. He ended the call and stood there for another 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked back across the yard and picked up the axe. He split the remaining wood with a focused efficiency that had nothing to do with the task and everything to do with having something to hit. He didn't tell Elena. That was the decision he made in those 30 seconds at the edge of the desert. And it was the wrong decision. And some part of him knew it was the wrong decision even as he made it. But old habits have deep roots. And the habit of managing threats by containing them, by handling them alone, by keeping the people around him insulated from the mechanics of danger, was older than anything else in him. It had kept people alive. It had also, he was beginning to understand, kept people away. He split wood for an hour. When he came inside to wash up at the kitchen sink, Elena was at the table reviewing something from her midwife. Papers, charts, the practical administration of the life she was building. She glanced at him, looked at the tension in his back, the set of his shoulders. He could feel her looking. What happened? She said. Nothing. She put the papers down. Damien, it is handled. That is not an answer. It is the answer I am giving you. The air between them changed. He felt it change. He stood at the sink with the water still running over his hands and watched the window in front of him instead of turning around. Look at me, she said. He turned off the water, reached for the dish towel, did not look at her. Damien, her voice had dropped. It wasn't angry. It was something worse. It was the voice she used when she was deciding something. Look at me. He looked at her. She was watching him with those dark eyes. and he could see in them the exact moment when whatever progress had been made in 9 days of porch sitting, and coffee, and painted steps, and split wood began to balance against what she was reading in his face right now. He could see the scale moving. "Someone knows where I am," she said. It wasn't a question. He held her gaze. "Yes, someone connected to your world. Yes, and you were going to handle it without telling me?" He said nothing. Elena put both hands flat on the table. The paper slid slightly. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at him. 3 years, she said quietly. "Precisely. 3 years of you managing things I wasn't told about. 3 years of being kept on the outside of my own life because you decided what I needed to know. I left that, Damien. I left it specifically. And you just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "You just did it again in my grandmother's house, in the first place I have had that felt like mine." He sat down across from her. Not because he had a speech ready. He didn't. But because standing felt wrong. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When? When it was resolved. That is the same thing as not telling me. You understand that? I was trying to protect you." She said the words cleanly without inflection. "I know you were protecting me. You protect people by keeping things from them, and making decisions for them, and deciding what they can handle. And then you are surprised when they don't trust you." She looked at him steadily. "I can handle things, Damien. I have been handling things alone for 9 months. Whatever this is, tell me right now. All of it." He looked at her across the kitchen table in the Arizona afternoon, with the heat pressing against the windows, and the baby pressing against her ribs, and the accumulated weight of every wrong choice he had ever made pressing against everything else. And he told her all of it. Caruso's name, the port arrangement, the nature of the message Marco had received. He said it plainly without minimizing it, and without dramatizing it, the way a man reports something true. When he finished, Elena was quiet for a long time. "Is she in danger?" she said. "Their daughter." She didn't say the baby. She said she, with the certainty of a woman who had known for months, had perhaps always known. "Not if I handle this correctly. And if you don't handle it correctly, I will. That is not an answer, and you know it." He leaned forward, forearms on the table. "Elena, look at me." He waited until she did. "I will not let anything happen to you or to her. That is not a promise I am making to earn something. That is the one thing in my life right now that is non-negotiable. Whatever I have to do." "Don't tell me what you have to do," she said sharply. "I don't want to know the mechanics of it. I have spent 3 years not knowing the mechanics of it, and that was bad enough." She put her hand on her stomach. "Fix it. And then we need to have a different conversation about what it means for someone with your history to be anywhere near this child." He absorbed that, nodded. "Okay," he said. "That is all you have to say? Okay. What else would you like me to say?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her face shifted. Not softening, but adjusting. The way a lens adjusts when it finally locks focus. "Nothing," she said. "Just fix it." He called Marco from the driveway at 9 that night. "Caruso," he said, "I want a meeting. Real one, in person. Damien, set it up." "That is not the logistics alone, Marco." He said the name the way he used to say it years ago before Arizona. Before painted porch steps, before porch chairs and desert mornings. The old way. The way that didn't leave room for conversation. "Set it up." A pause when? 3 days. Neutral location. "I will come to him." That is going to send a message. It is supposed to send a message. The message is that I am coming in person, which means I am serious, and that I am coming to him, which means I am not afraid of him, and that I am giving him 3 days, which means my patience has a specific shape and he is now inside it. He looked back at the house at the lit kitchen window. Get it done. He went back inside. Connie was in the living room, pretending to watch television. She looked at him over her glasses when he came through the door, with a particular quality of attention that didn't need to announce itself. "She is in her room," Connie said. "I know. She is not sleeping. I know that, too." He stood in the hallway for a moment. "Connie, I need to leave for a few days. I will be back before the baby comes." "Yes. How certain are you of that?" He thought about it. He could have said very certain, which would have been a version of the truth. Instead, he said, "I am going to do everything I can to make it certain," which was the complete version. Connie looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. Then she said, "Her due date is the 14th. You have until the 13th, and I mean that with all the precision God gave a calendar. He almost smiled, understood. He knocked on Elena's door. She said, "Come in." She was lying on her side in the low lamplight, not reading, just lying there with her hand on her stomach and her eyes open. She had the look of a woman who has been thinking hard and arrived somewhere she didn't entirely like. "I have to go to Chicago," he said. She looked at him. "For how long?" "A few days. I will be back." "Will you?" "Elena, I am not asking to be difficult. I am asking because the last time you made me a promise about something that mattered." "Oh, I know." He stood in the doorway. "I know what the last promise cost. I am not making you another one. I am telling you what is happening, and I am telling you I will be back, and that is all I have." He looked at her in the lamplight. The fullness of her, the tiredness, the weariness. The thing underneath the weariness that wasn't yet trust, but was at least no longer completely closed. "I will be back." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "There is a bag by the front door. Connie packed it last week in case the hospital is needed quickly. If I call you, I will get on a plane." "If I call you," she said again more slowly, looking at him directly. "You get on a plane, not in 4 hours, not after one more meeting. You get on a plane." "Yes." She turned her face back toward the wall. "Good night, Damien. Good night." He pulled her door closed and stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark, listening to the house settle around him. The desert wind was picking up outside. He could hear it moving against the windows, pressing lightly, the way things press when they want in. He went to his room at the end of the hall. Connie's sewing room, converted with minimal ceremony to a bedroom, by the addition of a cot and a clean blanket and a lamp. He sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the floor. He was a man trying to dismantle an empire while sitting on a cot in a sewing room in Arizona, waiting to be allowed to know his own daughter, having just admitted to the woman he had failed most completely that someone from his old life had found her. All because he hadn't managed in 3 years of marriage to be the kind of man worth trusting. He lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. 3 days to Chicago and back. 3 days to sit across from Vincent Caruso and make it clear in the language men like Caruso understood that Miraloma, Arizona, was a place that did not exist in any conversation that had anything to do with Damen Moretti's past. 3 days to close a door that should never have been left open. On his way to becoming a man who was done with doors like that, he closed his eyes. Down the hall through the wall, he heard Elena shift in her bed. A small sound, the sound of a woman trying to find a comfortable position when comfort has temporarily left the building. Then quiet. He slept. He was at the airport in Phoenix before dawn. Marco was waiting for him at O'Hare in a dark car, engine running. The city gray and damp behind him, looking exactly like what it was. A man who hadn't slept either, who had spent 3 days making phone calls that needed to be made carefully, and who greeted Damien with nothing more than a nod and the address of a restaurant on the near west side where Caruso would be at noon. They drove without talking for a while. Then Marco said, "He is bringing 2 men. I will bring you. That is not Marco, right? What is his read on this? What does he actually want?" Marco thought about it. He wasn't a man who answered quickly when a question deserved not to be answered quickly. "I think he wants to know which version of you is walking into that restaurant, the old one, or whatever this is. And if it is whatever this is, then he will decide if that is an opportunity or a problem." Damen looked out the window at Chicago sliding past. The neighborhoods he knew the way he knew his own hands. Every block with its history, its arrangements, its debts long paid and unpaid. The city that had made him, the city he was piece by piece trying to unmake himself from. "It is both," he said. "Tell him it is both." Marco glanced at him. "That might be the most dangerous thing you could say to a man like Caruso." "Good," Damen said. "I want him to understand the conversation correctly from the start." The restaurant was Italian, naturally. There was something almost comedic about it, the way these things always landed in Italian restaurants, as if the genre demanded it. Caruso was already at the table when they arrived. His 2 men positioned with the visible casualness of people who are not being casual. He stood when Damien came in, which was a gesture, the precise meaning of which Damien read in about a quarter second and filed. Respect, that was also a measurement. They shook hands, sat. The waiter appeared, and Caruso waved him away. and they were alone in the particular privacy of a restaurant that knew better than to seat anyone near this table today. "You look different," Caruso said. "Do I?" "Less." He searched for the word. "Less like you are carrying everything." He said it without warmth, but without hostility either. "The way you change in weather." "I put some things down," Damien said. "I heard." Caruso poured himself water from the carafe. Didn't offer any. Another measurement. The Duca operation. The port. That is significant weight to put down. I know what it is. Those people are going to need to be absorbed somewhere. That is not my problem anymore. Caruso set his glass down. It is my problem, which makes it your problem, which is why we are sitting here. Damien looked at him. Then let me be clear about something before we go further. He said it without shifting his posture, without any of the physical signals that in their world traditionally preceded a change in register. The woman in Arizona is not part of this conversation. Not now, not as context, not as a reminder, not as anything. You mention her again directly, indirectly, by implication or by absence, and whatever conversation we might have had ends permanently. And everything that implies for you and your operation, you have already thought through because you are not a stupid man. Caruso was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Damien with the eyes of a man recalibrating. That is the child, Caruso said carefully. Your child. That is a place that does not exist in any conversation connected to my name. Do you understand me? Another pause. Then Caruso nodded slowly. Understood. Good. Damien reached for the water carafe himself, poured a glass, drank, set it down. Now tell me what you actually need, and Caruso told him. And Damen listened, and across the table, in the particular silence between two men who understand each other's capacity for damage and are choosing in this moment not to deploy it, a negotiation began. It was going to require Damien to give up something he hadn't planned to give up, and take something he hadn't known was being offered, and make one more decision about the shape of the man he was trying to become. But before the negotiation had gone 20 minutes, his phone lit up on the table. Elena's name. He picked it up before the second vibration. I am here, he said. Her voice came through the phone different from every other time he had heard it. Stripped of the careful management, the precise control, all the architecture she had built to keep herself steady. What was left underneath was raw and immediate and human in a way that hit him somewhere below the chest. It is early, she said. Damn it is 3 weeks early, and Connie can't. A sharp and controlled breath. The sound of someone riding a contraction and refusing to drown in it. She can't drive. Her knee. I need. He was already standing. I am coming, he said, right now. Elena, listen to me. Call the midwife first, then call 911. If the midwife says go to the hospital, don't wait for me. I know what to do. Another breath. Harder this time. Just come. I am coming. He ended the call and looked at Caruso across the table, and Caruso looked back at him. And something passed between them in that look that had nothing to do with ports or operations or the careful geography of men who controlled things. Caruso looked at him and saw something he recognized. Not the Mafia boss, not the negotiator, not the man who just laid a line in the sand about Arizona. He saw a man whose child was coming into the world 3 weeks early while he was sitting in a restaurant in Chicago and had not yet managed to deserve the moment. Go, Caruso said. Damen was already moving. Marco drove to O'Hare at a speed that was technically inadvisable and practically necessary. He ran every yellow light the city offered, and 2 that were less than yellow. While Damen sat in the passenger seat with his phone in both hands and called the only airline number he had memorized. He said the words that in his former life had always worked, and were working now. Because some machinery of his old world still responded to his name like a key in a lock. There was a flight in 40 minutes direct to Phoenix. He would make it if the traffic held. The traffic held. He moved through the airport in the controlled fast walk of a man who is not running. Because running is for people who have already lost, and he had not lost yet. Not yet, not today, not this. He was through security in 9 minutes because Marco had called ahead with the kind of call Marco knew how to make. And he was at the gate with 4 minutes to spare. And he sat in the boarding area and called Elena. She didn't answer. He called Connie. Connie answered on the first ring. We are in the car, she said. Elena's friend from the prenatal class, Patricia. She is driving us. We are 12 minutes from the hospital. How is she? Contractions 5 minutes apart, and she is being very stubborn about how fine she is. Which means she is not fine. A pause. You are on a plane. Boarding now. Flight time 3 hours and 40 minutes. I will get a car at Phoenix. That is 5 hours minimum. He knew. He was aware of the math in the way you are aware of a piece of glass in your hand. Precisely. Unavoidably, with the specific quality of pain that comes from something you can't remove quickly enough. Tell her I am coming. She knows you are coming. Another pause. The sound of a car moving, the muffled backdrop of Arizona desert highway. Damien, yes. She is scared. She won't say it, but she is. He pressed his hand flat against his knee. So am I, he said. Connie was quiet for a moment. Then I will tell her. He boarded the plane. 3 hours and 40 minutes is a very long time when you are sitting in a middle seat on a commercial flight somewhere over the American interior, with your phone in airplane mode and nothing between you and your own thoughts except recirculated air and the low roar of engines. He had no distractions he was willing to use. He didn't want music, didn't want the movie playing silently on the screen in front of him, didn't want the drink the flight attendant offered twice. He sat in the middle seat. He had taken the middle seat because it was the only one left. And he thought. He thought about the morning 3 years ago when his father's attorney had placed a photograph of Elena Vale on the conference table and said Enzo thought this would be a good arrangement. He thought about the wedding, which had been elegant and well attended and efficient. He thought about the first night in the house in Lincoln Park when Elena had unpacked her books onto the empty shelves in the study. He had watched her from the doorway for a moment before walking away without saying anything. Because saying something would have required a version of himself he hadn't known how to access. He thought about 8 months of believing she had done what he had told her to do. 8 months of silence in that house, in that city, in that life. Silence he had created, silence he had chosen. Silence that had been his protection against having to feel the full weight of what he had thrown away. He thought about the square, the afternoon light, her hand on her stomach. He thought about a porch in the desert, and a rocking chair and coffee from a diner. And a man who had shown up every morning with nothing to offer but his presence, which had felt in the beginning entirely insufficient, and which he was only now beginning to understand was actually the only thing that had ever been asked of him. Simply to show up, to stay, to be present in the lives of the people he was supposed to love, instead of managing them from a careful distance. The plane began its descent. He turned his phone on before the wheels were fully down, which technically wasn't allowed, and which he did without hesitation. There were 3 texts from Connie and a missed call from a number he didn't recognize that turned out to be the hospital's maternity ward. He read the texts in order. She is in doing well, stubborn, asking for you. Won't admit it, but she is. Where are you? He typed back, landing in 30 minutes. He was off the plane before the seatbelt sign had fully extinguished. Moving through the jetway, with the focused velocity of a man who has one direction and no interest in anything that isn't that direction. And the airport parted around him the way airports part around people who carry a particular quality of intention. The car was waiting at the curb. Marco had arranged it remotely from Chicago because Marco arranged things. That was what Marco did. And for the first time in years, Damien felt the full weight of his gratitude for that without the habitual dismissal of feelings that weren't operationally useful. He drove himself. The rental car smelled of pine air freshener and had a navigation system he didn't use because he had memorized the route to the hospital in Miraloma weeks ago, which he hadn't told anyone, which he had done quietly on a Tuesday afternoon when he had sat on the porch and looked up the nearest level 2 maternity ward while pretending to read something on his phone. He had been preparing. He had been preparing for this the way he had always prepared for things. Quietly, alone, without announcing it, collecting information and creating contingencies, because that was the language he spoke, and he had been speaking it toward a new purpose. 41 minutes after landing, he pushed through the doors of the maternity ward on the 3rd floor of Mesa Verde Hospital, and the nurse at the station looked up at him, and he said, "Elena Moretti." He said it without thinking, her married name, and registered the choice even as he made it. And the nurse said room 307. And he went. He stopped outside the door. He stood there with his hand not quite on the handle and breathed. He could hear nothing. Actually, the corridor was quiet. It was the kind of hospital quiet that is not peaceful, but is instead the sound of many things happening at a controlled pitch that conceals the extremity of what they are. He knocked. Connie's voice. "Come in." He pushed the door open. The room was small and lit with the particular neutral light of medical spaces. Connie was in the chair by the window, hands in her lap, watching the door. Patricia. He assumed the woman near the window was Patricia. Looked at him with the uncertain expression of someone who has heard a great deal about a person and is now receiving the actual person and recalibrating. Elena was in the bed. She was between contractions. He could tell by the relative stillness of her face, the moment of rest between the waves. She looked at him when he came through the door and said nothing. And her face did something complicated that he didn't try to name, just received. Let it land where it landed. He crossed the room and pulled the chair from the corner to the side of the bed and sat down and said, "I am here." "I can see that," she said. "How are you?" "I have been better." A pause, then with the ghost of something dry and almost fond. "I have also been worse. That is honest. I am trying something new." He almost smiled. She almost smiled back. Then a contraction hit, and the almost smile left her face completely, and she pressed her lips together and breathed through it with the hard, deliberate focus of someone converting pain into information. And he watched her do it and felt something in his own chest tighten in perfect sympathy, which was new, which was startling, which he filed and did not address. "You can hold my hand," she said through her teeth in the middle of the contraction. "If you are just going to sit there looking useless." He took her hand. Her grip was stronger than he expected. He didn't show it on his face. He wouldn't have regardless, but he registered it. The full strength of her holding on. The nails not quite digging in. The absolute physical reality of another person in extremity, trusting you with their body. Because you are the person available, and because on some level below the argument and the history and the careful architecture of self-protection, the body still knows what the mind hasn't decided yet. The contraction passed. She released his hand slowly, didn't look at him. "You made it," she said to the ceiling technically. "I told you I would. You did. A breath. That is the thing. You did." She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were tired and dark and clear. The way eyes get when everything non-essential has been burned off by pain and time, and the approaching reality of something too large to prepare for completely. "I didn't think you would," she said. "I want you to know that I didn't think you would actually come." It was the most honest thing she had said to him since the square, maybe ever. "I know," he said. "But you came anyway." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the ceiling. "Okay," she said quietly, like a door opening a single careful inch. "Okay." The labor lasted 11 more hours. Not 11 easy hours. There was nothing easy about any of it. The contractions got harder and longer and closer together. And Elena refused the full epidural and compromised on something partial that took the edge off without removing her ability to feel what was happening. Because Elena had always needed to feel what was happening. She had always needed the full honest data of any situation, and labor was not going to be the exception. Damien stayed. He didn't say much. He wasn't a man who knew how to fill difficult spaces with words. And he had learned in the past weeks that in this particular context, silence delivered in person was a different thing than silence delivered through absence. That just being in the room, just being the person whose hand she could hold when the waves hit, was a form of communication he hadn't known he was capable of. He got her ice chips when the nurse said ice chips were what was available. He adjusted the pillow behind her back 3 times until she stopped making the specific expression that meant it was wrong. When a resident came in to check her progress and spoke to Connie instead of Elena, Damen said quietly, but with a quality of finality that required no volume, "You are speaking to her." The resident corrected immediately. Elena noticed. She didn't say anything. She noticed. At 2:47 in the morning, in the particular exhausted cathedral of that delivery room, with the desert dark pressing against the single window, and the monitors recording everything in their patient numerical language, Elena made one final terrible effort, and the room changed. The sound was immediate and indignant and completely itself. A voice that had never existed before this moment, announcing its existence with the full conviction of someone who has arrived somewhere and intends to stay. The nurse placed the baby on Elena's chest. And Elena. Elena, who had not cried in the lobby, who had not cried in the kitchen, who had driven alone to Arizona and rebuilt herself in the desert one quiet day at a time, who had maintained her composure through 11 months of abandonment and discovery and fear and labor. Elena made a sound that was not a word and not quite a sob, but something between them, something that contained everything, and pulled her daughter against her. Damen stood. He hadn't planned to stand. He had been sitting in the chair to the right of the bed. And he simply stood because something in him required it, required the full upright physical attention of his entire body for what he was seeing. The baby was very small and very red, and was already quieting against Elena's skin, the first indignant announcement, giving way to the specific calm of a creature that has found the place it belongs. She had dark hair, wet and flattened, and her eyes were shut in, and her hands. Damien could see her hands, the impossibly small, specific reality of them. The fingers already curled with purpose were pressed against Elena's collarbone. The nurse looked at Damien. "Dad, would you like to cut the cord?" He looked at Elena. Elena looked at him. Her face was wrecked and exhausted and entirely without guard for the first time in as long as he had known her. All the management burned away. And she looked at him with their daughter on her chest and said nothing, just held his gaze. And he understood in that held gaze that whatever happened in the next minute was going to mean something neither of them could take back. He stepped forward. He cut the cord. The nurse showed him how to hold her. Head supported, body cradled, the specific geometry of someone extremely new who doesn't yet know they need to be held carefully. He took her. She was very light and very warm, and she smelled of something he had no reference point for, something that was simply itself. And she opened her eyes, dark, unfocused, taking in the blur of the world for the very first time, and found his face. He stood in the delivery room at 3 a.m. in Arizona and looked at his daughter and felt the last wall come down. Not dramatically, not with any of the violence of the other collapses in his life. His father on the pavement, the lobby, the parking lot, the square. This was different. This was quiet. This was the specific, revocable quiet of something that cannot be undone or managed or controlled or walked away from. He was her father. He had almost not been. He had chosen in a kitchen in Chicago on a cold morning to not be, had said the words, had been clear, had believed he meant them. And she was alive because Elena had lied to him for the first and only time in their relationship, had absorbed the cost of that lie alone for 9 months, had protected this child from the father who tried to cancel her before she could become herself. He stood there with her in his arms and understood all of that at once. And the understanding was not comfortable and was not supposed to be, and he didn't look away from it. Behind him, Elena was watching. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize, exhausted and open and careful in something else beneath those things. Something that wasn't trust yet, but was the place where trust begins, the cleared ground before the building starts. "She needs a name," Elena said. He looked down at the baby. The baby continued her blurry, serious assessment of the world. "You choose," he said. Elena was quiet for a moment. "Lucia," she said. "Lucia Moretti." He looked at her across the room. Both names, his and hers, in that order. He understood what she was offering and what she was not yet offering, the precise boundary of it. And he received it exactly as it was given, without asking for more, without pretending it was more than it was. "Lucia," he said. The baby made a small sound as if acknowledging the transaction. Connie, from the chair by the window, said, "Good. Now, can someone please tell me there is coffee somewhere in this building?" He stayed at the hospital through the morning. He didn't sleep. Elena slept in 2-hour stretches, the heavy truncated sleep of someone running on fumes. And Connie slept in the chair with the unself-conscious totality of a woman who had earned the right to sleep anywhere. Lucia slept in the bassinet beside the bed, tightly wrapped. her small face carrying the particular ancient seriousness of the newly arrived. Damen sat in the corner chair and watched his daughter breathe. He thought about Caruso, about the negotiation left unfinished in the Italian restaurant in Chicago, about the peace he would have to give up, about the shape of the life he was building in the space where the old one had been. He thought about Marco, who would need instructions by morning. He thought about the handful of operations still running under his name that he hadn't yet figured out how to close without creating the kind of vacuum that gets filled by worse things. He thought about all of that the way you think about logistics, when the thing in front of you is too large to think about directly. In pieces from the side, giving the main thing the peripheral attention it needed while the central fact of it settled into him slowly. Damen Moretti. He had a daughter. He was going to need to become someone she could look at. His phone lit up at 6:45. Marco. He stepped into the hallway and answered it quietly, pulling the door almost closed behind him. Caruso agreed, Marco said. The terms you floated before you left, he will take them. He wants it in writing by Friday. Get it done. There is something else. A pause. The particular pause that in 11 years Damien had learned to read as Marco deciding how to package something that wasn't going to land well. Caruso's source. The person who told him about the woman in Arizona. You found them? Yeah. Another pause. Damien, it was someone on your side. Someone who had been in your house. He stood in the hospital corridor at 6:45 in the morning, outside the room where his daughter was sleeping, and felt the cold spread through him with the specific quality of a betrayal. Not surprise. He was past surprise. But the particular weight of learning that the breach had been inside, had been someone who had sat at his table, had been someone he had. Who? He said. Marco told him. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, handle it. How far? Far enough that it is finished. Not further. Understood. He ended the call, stood in the corridor, breathed. Then he pushed the door open and went back into the room and sat in the corner chair. He looked at Lucia, who was still asleep, who was unaware of any of it. The negotiation, the betrayal, the machinery of consequence grinding along outside these walls, and who was in her complete unawareness the clearest argument he had ever encountered for why all of it needed to stop. He looked at his daughter. She breathed in, she breathed out. He made a decision that was not dramatic and was not spoken aloud and was not witnessed by anyone in that room, and was the most significant decision of his life. He was done. Not stepping back, not restructuring, not managed withdrawal with contingencies and exit ramps. Done. Completely, irrevocably, finally done. And if that created problems, he would face those problems as the man he was becoming instead of the man he had been. Which meant facing them openly, accountably at whatever cost that required. He would lose things. He already knew that. Men who walked away from what he was walking away from lost things. Money, protection, the quiet insurance that came from being feared. He had spent his entire adult life inside that insurance and didn't know yet what he was without it. He looked at Lucia. He was about to find out. From the bed, Elena's voice came. Sleep rough and low, you are still here. Yes. A pause. It is almost 7. I know. Another pause. Then there is a diner on Main Street. He waited. They open at 7, she said, if you were going to get coffee. He looked at her. She had her eyes closed still. Her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone offering something small and needing it to not be a large thing. Needing it to be receivable without weight. He stood. Same order, he said. Same order. He got his jacket from the back of the chair. At the door he paused. Elena. She opened her eyes. Thank you, he said, for lying to me. She looked at him across the room in the early morning hospital light, their daughter breathing between them in her bassinet, and her expression moved through something he couldn't name and arrived somewhere quiet. Don't make me regret it, she said. He nodded. He walked out into the corridor and down to the elevator and out through the hospital doors into the Arizona morning, which was already warm, already golden, already doing what desert mornings do, arriving without apology, burning slowly toward the day. He walked to the diner. He ordered 2 coffees. He did not know yet that in 4 hours, Marco would call again with news that would require him to make one more trip to Chicago before this was truly finished, and that the trip would cost him something that couldn't be replaced. and that Elena would find out about it before he had the chance to tell her himself, and that everything he had built in the past weeks, every painted step, every split log, every morning on the porch, would balance on a single knife edge, while she decided whether the man who walked back through her grandmother's gate was the same man who had walked out, or finally at last someone different. He didn't know any of that yet. He just stood at the counter of a diner in a desert town in Arizona and waited for 2 cups of coffee and felt the morning come in through the open door. Someone worth knowing. The name Damien gave Howell was Anthony Sear, 53 years old, operated out of the near North Side with the particular low profile of a man who had learned early that visibility was the enemy of longevity in their world. Sear had been adjacent to Damien's operations for years, never inside them, never a direct partner. Always the third party in arrangements that required a third party and benefited from that third party not being examined too closely. He had motive. Caruso's agreements with Damien had displaced a distribution arrangement. Sari had been running through Caruso's infrastructure for 6 years. 60% of his operational income gone with 3 days' notice. Signed away in a restaurant on the near West Side by a man who hadn't thought to consult him. He had method. The staging of Caruso's death, the robbery framing, the location, the timing. It had the specific fingerprints of a man Sear used for problems he needed to look like other problems. Damien had encountered that man's work twice before. He knew the grammar of it, and he had the particular kind of intelligence that had allowed him to survive 53 years. In a world where most people didn't. He had understood immediately that Caruso's death would land on Damien, and he had let it. And he had watched, and he had waited to see what Damien would do. What Damien had done was walk into a federal building and give Howell his name. Sear found out at 7:48 that evening. Damien was in his hotel room when his phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. And he looked at the number for 1 second and understood, with the animal certainty of a man who had spent 23 years reading situations, that this was either Sear himself or someone calling on his behalf, and that the call meant Sear's intelligence network was faster than he had accounted for. Which meant the window Marco had described, the window of risk before the word got around, had just closed. He answered, "Damen." The voice was Sear's. 60 seconds since he had gotten the name from whatever source he had in the federal building, and he was already on the phone, which told Damen the source was close, which told him the source was someone at a level he hadn't anticipated. "Anthony," he said. That was quick. Sear's voice had the quality of a man who is angry in the cold, controlled way. The way that doesn't raise itself because it doesn't need to. "I didn't think you would move that fast. I had a timeline. Your timeline just created a problem for me. Your problem started when you killed Caruso and pointed it at me." A pause. "I don't know what you are talking about, Anthony." Damien said it the flat way. "We have known each other for 11 years. Don't do that." Another pause, longer. The sound of Sear breathing. The sound of a man making calculations. "What exactly did you give them?" "Your name. What they do with it is their business. A name isn't evidence." "No, but it is a direction. And Howell doesn't need much of a direction. He has been building a file for 2 years. He just needed the right corner to start pulling." He moved to the window. The hotel was downtown, the lake, visible in the evening light, Chicago spreading away from it in both directions. "I am giving you information, Anthony, not a threat. Information. They have your name, and they have a reason to use it. What you do with that is your business." "What I do with it," Sear said slowly, "might include having a conversation with you about the wisdom of names being given. That is your choice. You would be comfortable with that." "No," Damen said. "I wouldn't be comfortable with it. I would deal with it." He looked at the lake. "I have made a decision about the kind of man I am going to be. That decision has consequences I am prepared to accept. If one of those consequences is you, then it is you. I am not going to manage my way around a hard thing anymore." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man reassessing the person he thought he was talking to. "You have changed," Sear said finally. Not a compliment. Not an insult. An observation. "The way you note that weather has changed with the implicit acknowledgement that changed weather requires adjusted plans." "Yes," Damien said. "That is inconvenient for both of us. Another pause. Then Sear said something Damien hadn't expected. Not a threat, not a negotiation, but a question asked with the genuine flatness of someone who actually wants to know. Was it the child? He stood at the window. Yes, he said. Sear made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something more private than that. Something that came from whatever was left in a 53-year-old man who had chosen a different path at whatever fork the path had presented. All right, he said, and ended the call. Damen stood at the window for a long time. He didn't know what Sear was going to do. He didn't know if the call had been a threat that had changed its mind, or an assessment that had reached a conclusion, or something else entirely. He didn't know if Marco's people were enough or positioned correctly, or if the next 48 hours would require him to be something he decided to stop being. He called Marco. Sear knows, he said. He called me. A beat. How fast? 40 minutes from when I gave Howell the name. That is a source inside the building. High level. Someone with immediate access. He paused. Marco, what is your current read on the next 24 hours? Elevated, Marco said, but not critical. Sear is smart. Smart men don't make moves that create more federal attention when they are already in the crosshairs. He called you instead of doing something. That is a tell. He is thinking, not acting. He might stop thinking. He might. I have got people on it. A pause. Where are you tonight? Hotel. I leave tomorrow morning. Stay in the room, not a suggestion. Order food. Don't go out. Let me handle the exterior. Marco, what, Damien? The firmness in it. The 11-year firmness of a man who has been saying stay in the room in various configurations for a long time. Stay in the room. He stayed in the room. He ordered food he didn't taste. He sat at the small desk and worked through emails from Bellamy about the status of the guardianship withdrawal, fully processed, no remaining filings, Lucia's name removed from every court document clean. He read it twice. Then he put the phone face down on the desk and sat with his hands flat on the surface and breathed. At 10:15, he called Elena. She answered on the first ring. I am coming home tomorrow, he said, then heard himself use the word and waited to see if she would correct it. She didn't. What time? She said. Early flight. I will be there by noon. Is it done? Most of it. He paused. Elena, I need to tell you something else. Of course you do. Her voice was tired, not unkind. The tiredness of a woman who is feeding a 6-week-old through the night and managing her own recovery and waiting for a man to come back from something complicated, and has the specific bone-deep weariness of someone who loves people who make things complicated. He told her about Sear, the call, what he had given Howell, the federal process that was now in motion. She listened. When he finished, she said, How long does this go on? The federal process? Months, maybe more. I will have to be available for follow-up. There will be things to answer for. He paused. I am going to be honest with you about all of it, every step. No managing it from a distance. I know. She paused. Damien, are you safe tonight? He thought about Marco, about the people in the exterior, about Sear on the phone saying all right and ending the call. Yes, he said. You are sure. Marco is handling it. A pause. Tell Marco I said thank you. Something shifted in his chest. I will. Another pause. The night sounds of Miraloma came through the line. The desert insects, the settling of the house. The small sounds of a place that had become something without announcing it. She did something today, Elena said quieter now. Lucia. She looked at the ceiling fan while I was feeding her and she smiled. A real one, not the gas bubble. A real one. He closed his eyes. I missed it, he said. You will be here for the next one. A pause. She does it whenever the fan is on. You can turn it on when you get here. He sat at the desk in the hotel room in Chicago with his eyes closed and felt the full weight of everything. The federal building, the signed document, Sear's call, Marco's exterior, the 23 years behind him, and the completely unmapped territory ahead. And underneath all of that, steady and specific and real, the image of his daughter looking at a ceiling fan and smiling for the first time. I will be there by noon, he said. I know, Elena said. He didn't sleep. He wasn't afraid. Or rather, the fear had been processed down to something he could function alongside. The way all feelings eventually became functional in a man who had learned young to treat his interior life as something to manage rather than inhabit. But he sat in the chair by the window and watched Chicago do its nighttime work, and thought about the next 24 hours with the particular attention of a man who has given up most of his weapons and is learning to find that condition acceptable. At 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed. Marco. A text, which was unusual. Marco called. Marco didn't text. Texting left records. And Marco had spent 11 years being careful about records. The text said, resolved. Cyr made a decision, not the one we were worried about. Talk tomorrow. He read it twice. He put the phone down. He didn't know yet what resolved meant in this specific context, and he wasn't going to find out until tomorrow. And he was going to accept that. Accept the not knowing. Accept that Marco had handled something in the exterior dark of Chicago, and that the details would come when they came. And that his job right now was to sit in the chair by the window and be the person who waits for morning. He waited for morning. It came the way it always did. The city going from black to gray to the particular filthy gold of a Chicago dawn, the lake catching it first, the light spreading west the way light always spreads, indifferent to the human weight of the night preceding it. He showered. He packed the single bag. He called down for coffee. When the coffee came, he stood at the window and drank it, and looked at the city for what he understood. In some layer below articulation, might be the last time he looked at it as something he belonged to. He was not native to Arizona. He had no particular claim on Miraloma, no history there, no roots. But Elena was there, and Lucia was there, and the porch was there. And the morning light came differently in the desert. Direct, immediate, without the glass and steel mediation of a skyline. And he had been in 6 weeks of mornings, slowly becoming someone who needed that directness. He picked up the bag. He went to the airport. Marco called at 7:40 while Damien was in the security line. Talk, Damen said. Cyr made contact through an intermediary last night, Marco said. Wanted to communicate something. What? That he is leaving. His word, leaving. Taking a portion of his operation and relocating it. Reducing his Chicago footprint. A pause. He also communicated that the source inside the federal building, the one who gave him your name so fast, was his. He is pulling that source. Withdrawing the access. Damen moved through the security line. Why? The intermediary said. Marco paused in the particular way of a man quoting someone else's words carefully. He said, Cyr, and I am relaying this verbatim. Tell him I understand about the child. The security line moved. Damien handed his boarding pass to the agent, walked through the scanner, collected his bag from the belt. He did all of it on the automatic surface of himself. While underneath it, something turned over slowly, like a stone revealing what has been living in the dark beneath it. Anthony Cyr, 53 years old, who had chosen a different fork at a different path, who had built 53 years in a world where most people didn't survive 30, who had called him last night and asked, was it the child? With the genuine flatness of someone who actually wanted to know. Anthony Cyr had looked at the situation and made the calculation that a man stepping away from everything for his daughter was a different kind of problem than the kind of problem you solve with action. That the word child meant something even here, even in this. Tell him I understand about whatever he is leaving behind, Damen said. Marco was quiet for a moment. I will pass it on. He boarded the plane. The flight to Phoenix was 2 hours and 40 minutes. He spent the first hour thinking about nothing, with the deliberate blankness of a man who has been running on adrenaline for 48 hours and needs to find the floor before he can stand on it. He spent the second hour thinking about Elena, not the complicated version, not the 11 months of history and hurt and careful negotiation, but just her, the specific person, her hands around a coffee cup, the way she said his name when she was trying not to show that it mattered to her. The sound of her voice on the phone at 2 in the morning saying, be careful, and meaning it. The remaining 40 minutes he spent thinking about Lucia, the ceiling fan, the smile. He was in a rental car by 12:15. The drive to Miraloma in the Arizona noon was the particular assault of full desert sun at its highest and most committed, the landscape doing nothing to soften it. The road running straight and honest through scrub and rock, with the unambiguous directness of something that has no interest in being anything other than what it is. He drove with the window down, hot air sage dust, the smell of the place that had become, without his planning it, the place he was going back to. He pulled up outside the house at 12:54. The gate was open. Connie's doing or Connie's forgetting, which in this case amounted to the same welcome. He went through it and up the painted steps, second and fourth, his work holding, and knocked on the door the way he always knocked, 3 times, the same as every morning. The specific knock that the house had learned to expect. Connie opened the door. She looked at him, looked him over the way she always did, top to bottom. The unsentimental inventory of a woman who had learned not to trust appearances, but had also learned that appearances contained information. Whatever she found in the inventory satisfied something. "You look terrible," she said. "I haven't slept." "No." She stepped back. "She is in the back." He went through the house, the specific geography of it. The kitchen with its morning smell, the hallway with its slightly uneven floor, the doorway to the back room that Elena had made hers. The room where Lucia's bassinet sat beside the bed, with the particular settled permanence of something that had found its place. Elena was in the chair by the window. Lucia was on her chest, face down, the specific position of a baby in the in-between state between sleep and waking, boneless and warm and entirely untroubled. Elena looked up when he came through the door. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him for 6 weeks. The assessment, the careful inventory, the continuous process of comparing what she saw against what she knew and updating accordingly. He stood in the doorway and let her look. "You are back," she said. "I am back. Is it done? The important parts." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at Lucia. "The fan is on," she said. He looked at the ceiling fan, turning slowly in the warm air. He looked at his daughter. Lucia, as if registering the attention even in her half-sleep, shifted slightly and turned her face upward toward the fan. And something crossed her face. The specific mobile expressiveness of a very new person encountering something familiar and finding it good. And she smiled. A real one. He stood in the doorway of the room in the house in Mira Loma, Arizona. 41 years old, 23 years of a life he was putting down behind him. Like a coat he had worn too long in rooms that were too small. And watched his daughter smile at a ceiling fan, and felt the last of whatever had been holding itself together by force, finally quietly come apart. Not in the way things had come apart before. Not the lobby, not the parking lot, not the conference room. Those had been the collapses of a man trying to remain a structure after the foundation had failed. This was different. This was the letting go of a man who had found something real to rebuild on, and no longer needed to hold the old thing together because the old thing didn't matter anymore. He crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the bed close enough that Elena could have reached him if she wanted to. Far enough that reaching was still a choice. Lucia found his face with her unfocused dark eyes. She was still smiling. "Hi," he said quietly. Just that. The baby made the sound, the low intermittent hum barely audible, the sound she made when she was content, the sound he had first heard at 11 days old, the sound that had, without his permission or preparation, become the most significant sound he had ever been in the presence of. Elena was watching him. He looked at her. Something in her face was different from every version of her face he had seen before. In the lobby, in the kitchen, in the hospital, on the porch, on the phone at 2 a.m. This was a face that had finished deciding something. He could see the decision in it, the way you can see the end of a long calculation in someone's expression when they have arrived at the answer. She didn't say what the decision was. She reached over and took his hand, not dramatically, not with ceremony. Just the practical, factual gesture of a woman taking the hand of a man who is sitting on the edge of her bed after 48 hours of being somewhere that had required everything he had left. Taking it the way you take someone's hand when you have decided finally on the inside that the hand is one you want to be near. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a long time. Outside, the desert afternoon was doing what desert afternoons do. The heat at its maximum, the light at its flattest. The mountains at the horizon going that particular deep purple that showed up only at the hottest hour, as if the heat itself was visible in the rocks. Lucia hummed. The fan turned. Elena's thumb moved once slightly against the back of his hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The months that followed did not move quickly. That was the first thing Damien had to learn. That the life he was building did not operate on the timelines he was accustomed to. His entire adult existence had been structured around momentum, around the relentless forward pressure of decisions that compounded into other decisions, around the particular velocity of a world where stillness was dangerous and waiting was a form of losing. He had been a man in constant motion, even when that motion was invisible to everyone around him. Muraloma did not accommodate that. The desert had its own pace and enforced it without negotiation. The mornings came when they came. The heat arrived at its own schedule. Lucia ate when she was hungry and slept when she was ready, and had no interest in accommodating anyone's sense of urgency. Connie moved through her days with the unhurried precision of a woman who had lived long enough to understand that rushing toward things did not make them arrive faster. It only made you more exhausted when they did. And Elena rebuilt trust the way the desert rebuilt after rain. Slowly, from the ground up, without announcing it, he learned to match the pace. It was not easy. There were mornings when the old restlessness came back. The need to be doing something conclusive, to be moving something forward, to be useful in the measurable transactional way he had always been useful. He would sit on the porch with his coffee and feel the restlessness moving through him, and breathe through it and stay in the chair, because the chair was the thing. The chair was what showed up. The chair was the practice of becoming someone who didn't need momentum to feel real. He was in the chair every morning. By the third month, Elena stopped checking whether he would be there. That was the moment he registered. Not dramatically, just a Tuesday. Just the ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday when she came out with her coffee and sat in the second chair, without the small unconscious pause she had always had before. The barely visible hesitation of a woman bracing herself for the possibility of absence. She just sat. She just trusted without deciding to trust that he would be there. He was there. He would always be there. The federal process took 11 months. Howell was thorough. Damien had expected that and had prepared for it as best he could, which meant sitting in conference rooms in Chicago 4 more times over those 11 months, answering questions that were not always comfortable and sometimes were genuinely painful, watching Howell and his colleagues build their understanding of 23 years of a life that Damen had already decided to leave, and was leaving piece by piece in those rooms, along with everything else. Fitch managed the legal architecture of it with the unhurried professionalism of a man who had stopped being surprised by the configurations of human failure and had developed instead a deep functional respect for the ones who tried to clean up after themselves. There were costs, real ones, not abstract. The divestment of the remaining operations done properly this time, fully, without the careful reservations and exit ramps of the earlier attempts, meant losing income streams that had been running for decades. The legitimate investments he had made over the years were sufficient to build on, but not to coast on. He was going to need to work in the actual sense with his own hands and his own name, in ways that didn't carry the particular overhead of what his name had meant for 23 years. He found that he didn't mind. He found, in fact, that there was something clarifying about it, the reduction of his life to its actual dimensions, the removal of the inflated version of himself that had been constructed over decades of fear and power, and the particular currency of being someone that other people were afraid of. What was left when you took all of that away was a man who knew how to work, who had always known how to work, who had applied that capacity to the wrong things for a long time and was redirecting it. He started with the house. Not Connie's house, though he continued to maintain it. The repairs accumulating into a running project that Connie supervised with the benign authority of a woman who had finally found a competent contractor and intended to use him fully. He started with a piece of land 2 miles east of town, 40 acres of scrub and rock and possibility that he bought with money he could account for publicly, and began the slow work of understanding what it could become. He didn't know yet. That was part of the point. Not having the plan fully formed before beginning, not requiring the outcome to be certain before starting, not managing the result from the moment of inception. He bought the land and walked it and thought about it, and talked to people in Muraloma who knew desert land and listened to what they said, which was something that had always been available to him and which he had never previously done. Because listening required the admission that someone else knew something you didn't. He was getting better at that admission. Elena watched the land project with the same careful watching she applied to everything about him. She drove out to it once when Lucia was 4 months old. The baby strapped against her chest in the particular arrangement that Lucia had decided was the acceptable way to be transported, and she walked the perimeter with him in the morning light and didn't say much. And looked at the mountains and looked at the land and looked at him. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I am thinking it is a lot of rock," she said. "It is. And a lot of work." "Yes." She looked at it for another moment. "It is good land," she said finally quietly, like something she hadn't been planning to say, but had decided to say anyway. He looked at her. She was looking at the mountains. He didn't say anything. He just stood there beside her, with Lucia between them in her carrier, and the desert morning pressing down warm and direct and honest, and felt the specific weight of a good thing. Not a perfect thing, not a resolved thing, not a thing with all its edges smoothed, just a good thing, present and real and his to take care of. The federal process concluded on a Thursday in March. Howell called Fitch, and Fitch called Damien. And the language of the conclusion was careful and specific in the way that legal language is always careful and specific when it is trying to say something that has to be precisely understood. What it said in the end was this: the cooperative disclosure had been reviewed, the documentation had been assessed, the operations had been mapped, and the mapping had been useful, and in recognition of the voluntary nature of the cooperation and the documented divestment that had proceeded and accompanied it, the file was being closed without charges. Damien sat in the kitchen in Miraloma when Fitch told him this. Lucia was in the bouncer on the table beside him, 4 months old, conducting her ongoing investigation of her own feet, which she had recently discovered and found endlessly compelling. Elena was in the doorway, having come in from the back porch when she had heard his voice drop into the particular register it took when important things were being said. He thanked Fitch. He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. Elena looked at him. "Done, done," he said. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him at the table, and looked at him with a clear, direct look. The one he had learned to read over months as the version of her that wasn't performing anything, that had no layer between what she felt and what her face showed. "How does it feel?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "Strange," he said. "Like putting down something you have been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. Does your arm hurt?" He looked at her. She was almost smiling. "Yes," he said. "My arm hurts." She nodded. She looked at Lucia, who had achieved a grip on her own foot and was regarding this achievement with the solemn satisfaction of an expedition that has reached its objective. "She is going to walk early," Elena said. "The midwife thinks by 10 months. She is determined. She gets that from somewhere." He looked at his daughter. "She gets it from her mother." Elena said nothing, but the almost smile completed itself briefly before she looked back at Lucia, and he received it like the thing it was. Not a concession, not a softening of anything that wasn't ready to be soft. Just a moment of genuine warmth between two people who had been through enough to earn the right to a moment of genuine warmth. The conversation they needed to have happened 6 weeks later, not because they had been avoiding it, or not only because of that, but because some conversations require a specific readiness that can't be manufactured, that has to arrive on its own schedule. And this one had been arriving slowly for months, accumulating mass the way weather accumulates before it breaks. It broke on a Sunday evening. Connie had driven to the next town to visit a friend and would be back late. Lucia was asleep, the specific irrefutable sleep of a 5-month-old who has exhausted herself with the work of existing and will not be interrupted by anything short of genuine emergency. The house was quiet in the way it got quiet on Sunday evenings, the desert dark coming down outside. The particular stillness that was either peaceful or unbearable, depending on what you were carrying into it. Elena was at the kitchen table. Damien was on the porch. He had been on the porch for an hour, and then he came inside and got a glass of water. And she looked at him when he came in and said, "Sit down." He sat. She had her hands around a mug. "Not coffee," Something else. Something warm. She was looking at the table. Then she looked at him. I need to say some things, she said. And I need you to just let me say them, all of them, before you respond. Okay. She was quiet for a moment. Then, when you told me to end the pregnancy in the kitchen that morning, I didn't argue with you. I told you I agreed and I walked out. And people who know about it or who I have told about it think I was being strong, that I had a plan. She paused. I didn't have a plan. I walked to my car and I sat there for 45 minutes and I couldn't move. I wasn't being strong. I was in shock. I just happened to be the kind of person who goes silent in shock instead of loud. He held very still. I need you to know that, she said. I need you to know what it actually cost. Not the version where I made a brave choice and drove to Arizona. The actual version, which is that for 3 days after I left Chicago, I wasn't sure I was going to be okay. Not as a performance of strength. Actually, not sure. Elena, I am not finished. He closed his mouth. I rebuilt myself in this desert, she said. In this house, with Connie, with the land and the heat in the mornings. I built something that was mine, and I built it alone. And I am proud of that. And then you showed up. And you sat on the porch, and you painted the steps. And you drove me to appointments. And you held my hand in the delivery room. And you went to Chicago and handed a federal agent 23 years of your life, and came back. She stopped, looked at her hands. And I have been watching you do all of it. And I have been waiting for the version of you that I know to show up. The one who closes doors. The one who makes decisions without telling me. The one who manages things. She looked at him. That version hasn't shown up. He is not coming back, Dam said. I know. She said it simply. That is what I am trying to tell you. I know. She set her mug down. I am not the same person I was in that kitchen either. The woman who put her coat on and walked out without looking back. She is still here, but she is not the whole thing anymore. She is part of something bigger now. Her eyes moved to the hallway, toward the room where Lucia slept, then back to him. I am not ready to forget what happened. I don't think I will ever be completely ready to forget it. But I have been thinking about the difference between forgetting and forgiving. And I think she stopped. He waited. I think I have forgiven you, she said. Not because you have earned it. I don't think forgiveness works on an earnings model. I think I have forgiven you because I have been carrying it for almost a year and a half, and I am tired. And you are not the same person who did it, and I am not the same person who had to survive it. And she is asleep down the hall, and she has your hands. She looked at him steadily. That is the whole reason. She has your hands, and I look at them every day. And I can't maintain the architecture of what happened and also be here, fully here for her. He looked at her. He had prepared somewhere in the back of himself for a version of this conversation. He had had months to think about what he might say, what he might offer in response to whatever she said. He had found no adequate version. Everything he could imagine himself saying had the quality of too much or too little, of presuming or retreating, of words that failed the scale of what they were trying to carry. He said the only true thing available to him. I am sorry, he said, not as a transaction, not to get something from you. I am sorry, because what I did was the worst thing I have ever done in a life that contained a significant number of bad things. And the worst part of it is not that you found out or that it nearly cost me Lucia. The worst part is that I said it. That the words were in me and they came out. That there was a version of me that morning who meant them. He held her gaze. I have spent months trying to understand how to be accountable for who I was, without using that accountability as a way to perform my own change. I don't think I have fully figured it out. No, she said. But you are trying. I can see you trying. She looked at him. That matters. The house was very quiet around them. The desert dark outside the window. The particular silence of a small town at 9 in the evening. The distant sound of something Lucia did in her sleep. A small, comfortable sound, barely audible, that they both heard, and that passed between them like the thing it was. What do you want, Elena? He said. Not what makes sense, not what is responsible. What do you actually want? She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he didn't try to fill it. Then she said, I want to build the life we never had. Not the one I thought we were going to have when I married you, because that was never a real life. That was an arrangement dressed up as a life. I mean, an actual one. With the land you are developing, and this house, and Lucia, and she stopped. And you here, consistently here. I am here, he said. I know. She looked at him. Stay here. I will. She nodded, picked up her mug. Then she said without looking at him, with the studied casualness of someone saying something they have been building toward and don't want to make too large. I would like to have the conversation about what we are. Not tonight, but soon. Okay. He said, we are not nothing. She said, whatever we are not nothing. No, he said, we are not nothing. The land project took shape over the following months. Not quickly. Nothing in the desert happened quickly, and Damien had stopped trying to make it. It took shape the way things took shape when you let them find their own form, rather than imposing one. Slowly, with detours and reconsiderations, and conversations with people who knew things he didn't, and with the gradual accumulation of small decisions that each by themselves seemed minor, and which together became a direction. He cleared and leveled a portion of it. He had soil tested, consulted with a woman in town who had been growing things in desert conditions for 30 years, and had opinions she shared with the directness of someone who had learned to value directness in a landscape that had no patience for anything else. He started with what could survive, drought-tolerant, honest things. Plants that didn't require the conditions to be other than what they were. Marco came to visit in June. He arrived in a car that was considerably less dramatic than anything he had driven in Chicago, which Damen suspected was a deliberate adjustment, and he stood at the gate of the property and looked at 40 acres of cleared desert and partial construction and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. It is something, Marco said finally. It is early, Damen said. What is it going to be? I am not sure yet. Something that produces something I can put my name on. He looked at the land. Something Lucia can come to. Marco looked at him. The 11-year look. The look that contained everything they had been through together and everything they were not, and the particular loyalty of a man who had made a choice to remain and had never asked for that choice to be acknowledged. You look like a different person, Marco said. I am. Marco nodded. Good. He said it with the blunt finality of a man who has been wanting to say it for a long time. It was time. They stood at the fence line and looked at the land and said nothing else for a while, and the nothing was the comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled, because the people in it have been in each other's company long enough that silence is just another form of communication. Later at dinner. Connie's table, Connie's food, Connie's opinions delivered freely throughout. Marco held Lucia for 20 minutes while she subjected him to her comprehensive assessment of his face, patting his cheek with the decisive authority of someone conducting a formal evaluation. He held her with the careful unfamiliarity of a man who had not held many babies, but was taking it seriously. Lucia approved of him. She made the hum. Marco looked at Damien across the table with something in his face that he didn't name, and that didn't need to be named. Damien looked back. He understood. The ring was not planned. That was the truest thing about it. He had not woken up on a particular morning and decided this was the day. He had not rehearsed the words, or identified the perfect location, or coordinated anything with Connie, or thought about what he would say and in what order. He had been thinking about it in the way he had been thinking about many things. Slowly at the edges, letting the thought accumulate weight before it became an action. But the actual moment was not planned. It was a Saturday evening in August, 7 months after the federal file had closed. 13 months after he had first appeared at Connie's gate, with coffee from the diner, and sat in the rocking chair, and waited to be allowed to remain. Lucia was 8 months old, and had recently discovered that forward motion was achievable through a combination of rolling and determined arm work, that she had developed into a system of locomotion that covered ground faster than anyone had anticipated. She was on the porch between them, executing this system in the direction of a wooden block that Damien had made for her from a piece of fence post. Sanded, smooth, edges rounded. Elena was watching her with the expression she had developed over 8 months of watching Lucia move through the world. The specific fond weariness of a mother who is simultaneously amazed by and afraid for a small, determined person who has not yet developed an appropriate relationship with the concept of limits. The sun was going down over the mountains. The desert was doing what it did at that hour, the light going gold and horizontal, the mountains going purple, the scrub catching fire at its tips. The whole landscape conducting its nightly passage from day into dark with a thoroughness that still struck him every evening, as something that couldn't quite be prepared for, regardless of how many times you had seen it. Lucia reached the wooden block, grabbed it, held it up toward the sky, with both hands in the gesture of someone presenting an offering or declaring a victory, her face carrying the full uncomplicated triumph of a person who has done the thing she set out to do. Damien looked at her. He looked at Elena. She was laughing, a real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of a woman who has been in the vicinity of this particular small, determined person for 8 months and has been ambushed again by the pleasure of it. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. He had been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, not planning a moment, just carrying it because it was there and he was here, and the opportunity would either arrive or it wouldn't. And he decided not to engineer it. The ring was simple. He had had it made by a jeweler in Phoenix, a woman who worked with reclaimed materials and had looked at what he described and made something that was exactly itself. A plain band with a single stone, modest, clean, purchased with money that was entirely accounted for and entirely his. He held it in his hand. Elena looked at him. She looked at his hand. She went very still. Lucia, oblivious to the reorientation of the adult world around her, put the wooden block in her mouth. "I am not going to say I deserve this," Damen said. "I know I don't. I am not going to say I have become someone different enough that the past doesn't exist. Because it exists, and we both know it. And it is always going to be part of the foundation under everything else." He looked at her steadily. "What I am going to say is that I love you. Not the way I should have loved you 3 years ago, which was badly, which was barely, which was the love of a man who didn't know what the word cost and wasn't interested in finding out." He paused. "The way I love you now, which is the only way I know how to love anything anymore. By showing up, by being here, by doing the thing every morning, regardless of whether it is acknowledged. Because the doing of it is the thing, not the acknowledgement." Elena's eyes were very bright. "I would like to marry you again," he said. "Not because it is expected, not because of Lucia, though Lucia is part of everything. Because I am asking you to let me spend the rest of my life being the person I should have been. And I would like to do that as your husband, if you will let me." The desert evening was very quiet. Lucia put the block down and looked at both of them, with the evaluating attention of someone who has registered a change in the atmosphere and is deciding what to do about it. Elena looked at the ring in his hand. She looked at his face. He waited. This was the whole thing. This was what all of it had been moving toward. Not the legal resolution, not the land, not the months of mornings on the porch. This was the question underneath all the other questions. The one that had been sitting at the center of everything since the square, since the hospital, since the hand she had taken in the delivery room, and the thumb that had moved once against his skin in the back room while Lucia hummed and the fan turned. She looked at him for a long time. "You already know what I am going to say," she said. "I know what I hope you are going to say." "That is not the same thing as knowing." "No," he said, "it is not." She looked at the ring again. At the plain, honest simplicity of it, at the hand holding it, the hand that had painted the steps and split the wood and cut the cord and held Lucia for the first time in the delivery room, and pressed flat on the table in the conference room in Chicago, and carried coffee every morning for months, and been extended and retracted and extended again in the careful, gradual, patient work of becoming. "Yes," she said, "just that." He put the ring on her finger. It fit. He had measured carefully. She looked at it on her hand, then she looked at him. Her eyes were still bright, and she was holding herself with the particular stillness of someone who has just made a large decision and is inhabiting it, feeling its dimensions. Then Lucia, who had been monitoring developments with appropriate attention, reached up from the porch floor and put her hand on Elena's knee, patting it with the decisive authority of someone who has rendered her judgment. Elena laughed. She reached down and picked up her daughter and held her against her chest, and Lucia looked over Elena's shoulder at Damien with her dark, serious eyes, and he looked back at her. And she did not smile exactly. She did something more specific than smiling. The expression of a small person who has assessed a situation and found it acceptable and sees no reason to pretend otherwise. He put his hand on her back. She made the hum. The wedding was small. That was the only word for it. Not intimate, which implied something curated, but small, which was simply descriptive. Connie's backyard. A judge from the next town who drove out on a Saturday and shook everyone's hand, and had the unhurried warmth of someone who had done many small weddings and had come to believe they were better than large ones. Marco, who had driven from Chicago in the considerably less dramatic car and who wore a suit and held Lucia for the ceremony, because Lucia had decided Marco was an acceptable person and would not hear otherwise. No ceremony beyond the ceremony. No flowers beyond what was already growing. No guest beyond the ones already present. They stood in Connie's backyard in the morning light and said what there was to say. He looked at Elena when he said it. At her face in the morning light, the face he had failed for 3 years to look at directly. That he had spent a year learning to look at. That he could now look at without the managed distance that had once been the only way he knew how to be near something that mattered. She looked back at him. Whatever was in her face was not the face of a woman who had arrived at a happy ending. Happy endings were for people who hadn't paid the full cost of the beginning. Her face was more complicated than that. It was the face of a woman who had survived something and rebuilt something, and was now choosing with full information and clear eyes to build something else on top of all of it. He understood that face. He had one of his own. That evening, after the judge had driven back to the next town, and Marco had returned to his hotel, and Connie had gone inside with Lucia, and the sun had done its daily passage down behind the mountains, Damien and Elena sat on the porch. 2 rocking chairs, coffee, the desert settling into its evening self, the heat releasing, the air going dry and cool at the edges, the stars beginning their patient appearance one by one in the darkening sky. They didn't talk much. They had said what needed to be said, most of it, over months of mornings and evenings and difficult conversations, and the slow, careful work of learning each other again at the level of who they actually were, rather than who they had been performing. There wasn't a backlog of things left unsaid the way there might have been between 2 people who had gotten here by a cleaner route. What was left was this: the porch, the evening, the presence of each other, the sound of Connie inside with Lucia, occasional evidence of Lucia's ongoing investigation of the world she had arrived into. After a while, Elena said, "Connie wants to give us the land." He looked at her. The house? The land behind the extension. She bought it years ago and never did anything with it. She wants us to have it for the project. A pause. She told me this morning. She said she didn't want to tell you directly because you would refuse. I would have refused. She knows. Elena almost smiled. She figured if I told you, you would have less room to refuse. Does she know you telling me gives me less room? She is 73 and she has been managing people her whole life. She knows everything. A pause. Will you take it? He looked at the land, the visible portion of it, the dark scrub at the edge of the yard where the property line was, and beyond which the desert continued in its indifferent abundance. Connie's land extending his. The 2 pieces fitting together the way things fit together when they have been adjacent for long enough. Yes, he said. Good, she rocked. She will be insufferable about it. I know. She will use it as permission to have opinions about everything you do with it. She already has opinions about everything I do with it. More opinions. A pause. The comfortable kind. She loves you. You know she would never say it. I know. He looked at the mountains. I love her too. Elena rocked. He rocked. The stars continued their patient accumulation overhead. The desert dark, pressing down full and clear and very close. From inside, Lucia made a sound. Not the hum. Something different, something new. A sound neither of them had heard before. High and exploratory. The sound of a small person testing a new capability and finding it interesting. They both went still, listening. The sound came again. Lena's expression shifted into the specific delight of a mother receiving new information about her child. That is new, she said. Yes. She is going to do that all night now, probably. They listened. The sound came a third time, longer, more elaborate. Lucia conducting her experiment with the focused commitment of a scientist who has found a variable worth investigating. Damen looked at the sky. He thought about the man he had been on the 42nd floor of a building in Chicago, holding a glass of scotch he never touched, looking at the city through glass. The distance between that man and this porch was not measured in miles. It was measured in everything. In cost, in loss, in the particular kind of transformation that doesn't feel like transformation while it is happening, but feels afterward like the difference between being alive and being operational. He had been operational for 23 years. He was alive now. He didn't say that to Elena. He didn't need to say it. She was beside him. And that was the whole statement. Her presence beside him, the ring on her finger. The sound of their daughter's voice coming through the window of the house that had become home without anyone deciding it would. The land extending behind them in the dark, waiting to become something. He reached over. He put his hand over hers on the armrest of the chair. She turned her palm up and held it. The stars came out completely. The desert said nothing. The desert never said anything. It just continued being what it was. Vast and indifferent and honest, and full of the particular silence that isn't emptiness, but is instead the sound of a place that has been here longer than any human decision, and will be here longer than any human consequence, and which offers to anyone willing to slow down enough to receive it the specific and irreplaceable information that the world does not require you to be what you were. Only what you are. Only what you choose each morning to become. Lucia made her new sound again, louder this time, with the confidence of someone who has decided the experiment is a success and intends to share the findings. Elena's hand tightened around his. He held on.